Hi, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for joining us tonight. I'm Sarah Gorecki, and I'm the Chief Publishing Officer at the Colorado Mountain Club. This evening, we have CMC Press author Nick Cote, who will show slides from some of the 60 recipes in his new book, Wild Eats. He will also share tips for camp cooking, whether you're making your own dehydrated backpacking meals or cooking for a crowd in a campground. His book, Wild Eats, will be 20% off during tonight's presentation on our website, cmcpress.org, which I'll put in the chat. And anyone who buys a copy of the book during tonight's event will be entered into a drawing to win a free gift membership to Colorado Mountain Club. We will announce the winner at the end of the event, and you can use the gift membership for yourself or give it to a friend. I'm sure you're all quite familiar with Zoom by now, but here are some friendly Zoom reminders. First, please keep your microphones muted and your cameras off during the talk. This helps with internet bandwidth. And just as a reminder, this session is being recorded. And please do ask your questions in the chat box as we go. I will interrupt Nick and ask him your pertinent questions, and we'll also do a Q&A at the end. But if you have a burning question as he's going through some of these how-to items or recipes, please go ahead and ask them in the chat box. And then I will turn my camera on and let Nick know that we have a question. Okay, and now to introduce tonight's speaker. Nick Cote is a journalist and an amazing photographer. He did all the photography for the book himself, and it's just beautiful. He's based in the Pacific Northwest, and his work has been featured in Backpacker, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the Washington Post, and many other publications. And now over to you, Nick.
Hello, you there?
Yep.
You there?
I can hear you.
Are you there?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, you just froze, Sarah.
Okay, well, I can hear you, Nick.
Hello?
I can hear you just fine, Nick. Can everyone hear Nick?
Go. Yeah, you were frozen there for a second.
Okay.
You're good now. Okay.
Great.
So, all right. Well, let's get started. Sarah gave you a little introduction to me. I am a photographer, writer, and oyster farmer based in Bellingham, Washington. And so this is the book, Wild Eats. I've been working on this for the past couple of years with Colorado Mountain Club, and excited to finally be able to share it with everybody. So a little bit about me. I was born and raised in Wyoming and have bounced around the West for quite a while between Oregon, Colorado, Arizona, Montana, and now Washington. And so, of course, being in all those places, I always was doing a lot of backpacking and a lot of camping and cooking my own meals because I love cooking. That's one of my favorite things to do. It's one of the things I do to relax at the end of a long day, or look forward to like cooking a meal like at a campsite or something like that. Mainly because I love eating, but I love the process of it too. So, and most of my background is in journalism. So I was a newspaper photographer for 5 years, and then branched out from there into freelance writing and journalism and photography. And then, after a lot of time cooking and writing and photography, I started doing work with Backpacker magazine. I had a good friend there who's an editor. So I would sometimes have So I would have, my backpacker editor friend over for dinner, and she said, why don't you start writing for us? So that's what I started doing about 5 or 6 years ago. So since then, I've done a lot of work with Backpacker, just kind of, like sometimes there'll be a theme that they would give me, say, hey, we want some recipes, that are spicy, or we want some dessert recipes or something, and I would put my energy towards figuring out a recipe for that. And then sometimes, a lot of times I would also have some kind of an itch that I need to scratch and say like, hey, I went backpacking and, try this out. Can I pitch this? Or, and then like, sometimes I do other projects like for our REI co-op journal, where I want to try something a little bit more ambitious, and was able to do that. So anyway, so a couple years ago, got involved with Colorado Mountain Club, and here we are now with a full book. So that's a little bit about me. And this is a little bit of the work that I've done previously. So one of my things about cooking is that I love cookbooks, and I have a full bookshelf of cookbooks, but I almost never follow a recipe just exactly as the recipe is. I think it's just like a guide. And so like all the recipes in this book are not meant to be followed to a T. In fact, I would rather you take these recipes and do your own thing with them. So if you have, your own taste and your own experience, like rely on that, because that's going to be your best guide. I can give you some basic proportions and use this amount of water, this amount of, whatever other ingredients, but here's what you can change. And that's how I love cooking. And that's how I encourage you to cook too, because there are a lot of different ways to get to, a delicious meal. And my way is not the only way. So that's really what I was hoping to accomplish with this book, is to give you the tools you need in order to make the meals that you want. So anyway, so this book is just a guide. It's not, you can change things as you wish. But so why cook your own food in the backcountry? I know that, a lot of times I will just go to a gear store or REI or whatever, and like buy a backpacking meal that's in a, sorry, I have a rotator cuff injury, so I'm one-armed here. But it's really easy to go and buy a meal that all you have to do is boil water for. And sometimes those are great. I use those sometimes too, but it's really awesome to have your own meals too sometimes, because you get to control how much you eat. So you get to control your portions. So, sometimes, you need to add fewer or more calories to your meal. And by creating your own meals, you get to control that. You know exactly what's in it. Not to knock on the dehydrated meals, but there are oftentimes a lot of preservatives in those, and a lot of sodium. So, if you're trying to watch what you're eating, then you have a lot more control over that when you're making your own food. And that goes for just eating in general, but you get to choose your own ingredients. So if you, have like if you're a hunter or something and you have a great cut of venison, you could, make your jerky out of that, or something. And then also you get to make it exactly how you like it. Everyone has different tastes. Some people like, spicier or saltier, or, more savory food. And you get to choose exactly what you put in those meals. And also you get to decide how long you want to spend cooking. So some of the recipes in here in this book are a little bit more involved, especially some of the Dutch oven recipes and car camping recipes, which I'm going to get to in a little bit. But a lot of them don't require a whole lot more than just boiling some water. So you got to be in control of that as well. And last but not least, it will save you a lot of money. In the long run, when you're dehydrating your own food and your own ingredients, you're going to be saving money, because, a bag of jerky is going to cost, $8 or $10 at the store, but you could get twice or 2 or 3 times as much jerky out of a piece of fresh meat that you buy and make into jerky yourself. So it is a great cost saving measure as well. So sometimes it's nice to have the convenience of just pouring boiling water into a packet, but I think the trade-off is that you use a little bit of control over what you're eating and how much you're spending. So one of the big things I wanted to do with this book was show people how to make their own backpacking meals. Using a dehydrator sounds really intimidating at first, but it's really easy, and you don't have to spend a whole lot of money on a dehydrator. There are lots of great ones for under $75. So where are we? But first, so one of the things in this book I differentiate between is backpacking and car camping. So backpacking is a totally different type of cooking and eating that involves different types of ingredients and different types of techniques and a lot of different equipment. So for me, when I was developing recipes with backpacking in mind, these are a few of the things that I was thinking about. First of all, it needs to be fast, because when you're backpacking, first of all, you don't have a lot of fuel, you probably don't have a lot of time, and you're probably tired from hiking all day. So it needs to be fast and not too fussy. Minimal trash is important, because you're taking everything with you and you're also packing it out. So you don't want to end up with, a bunch of trash that, smells really bad and is taking up room in your pack. So that's another consideration. Dishes, everyone hates doing dishes. But in the backcountry, there are a whole lot of other considerations you have to take into account too, whereas, you may have limited water, or you don't want to contaminate the water that you're near. Like, you don't want to just do your dishes in a lake next to your campsite, because even biodegradable soaps are not really good for the fish and wildlife and ecosystem there. So minimal cleanup. It's got to be light, and it has to be small. So sometimes, like, some things that are light, might not fit very well into a backpack. And also being shelf stable. So anything that doesn't require refrigeration, I will generally, there's some times where you could, like, depending on conditions, bring like a few cheeses or something. And, like, you could bring like a small block of Parmesan cheese with you to put on top of some pasta or something. And that'll probably be okay for, a day or two out in the backcountry, but you wouldn't want to bring like a soft cheese, like a brie or something, or, or meat that, you know, requires refrigeration. So it needs to be shelf stable. And it's also got to taste good, because if you've been hiking and exerting energy all day, you're going to want, and you're also going to put the time into cooking a meal, you're going to want that to taste good. So that's important too. It's got to hit the spot. And this is what I took into consideration when I was developing meals for backpacking. So you don't need a whole lot. I mean, obviously you need your basics for backpacking. You need your, you know, lightweight stove, cook set, you know, what have you, utensils. But there are a couple of things that I use at home that help me prepare to bring meals into backcountry. First of all, I already mentioned the dehydrator. That's going to help you, you know, bring whatever kind of fruits, vegetables, meats you want into the backcountry. Vacuum sealer is another thing. You can always use zip top plastic bags, but vacuum sealers will keep your food fresher for longer, and also pack it down really small, so it fits in your bag, like, you know, really tight. There's no extra space. And they also make great little trash bags. When it's for you cleaning up, you can throw your scraps and other trash into that bag, and, you know, doubles as a trash bag. And also a kitchen scale too. If you're really trying to keep track of how much weight you're bringing into backcountry, it's a good way to just know like how much your meals weigh. And it also helps with portioning out ingredients, and or doing any kind of cooking that involves exact measurements. So these are a couple of the things that I use at home that really help me cut down on weight and excess packaging and excess, you know, like being able to just have all your food in one bag really helps a lot. So those are a couple of things that I use at home. So this is a slide from the book, section on dehydrating food, and a couple of my favorite things to dehydrate are in there. You really don't need much of a dehydrator. Like for under $75, you can get a pretty good one that will go up to 160, which 160 is the minimum you would need for making any kind of jerky or anything like that. So it's good to have a dehydrator that goes at least that high, and then, you know, multiple trays, because, or as many trays as you can, because dehydrated food gets very small. So when you start dehydrating something, it's going to take up a lot of room at first, and then it's going to get tiny. So you need a lot of space in that dehydrator. But they're also really nice to have around the house too, just for your own, you know, non-camping or backpacking needs. If you say have a garden or you know, fruit trees or something like that, you can preserve a lot of your own food that way. You know, if you have an apple tree or something, you can, you know, dehydrate a bunch of apples that would otherwise just fall on the ground or go to waste. So I like having it, you know, for a lot of reasons beyond just making backpacking food. Yeah, it's a really nice tool to have. And then, of course, for making snacks, it's really nice. You can dehydrate almost anything. Doesn't mean you should dehydrate everything, but almost any fruit will dehydrate really nicely, which you can make into snacks that, or add into like oatmeal or, you know, something like that, like, you know, bananas and strawberries. If you just add that to instant oatmeal in the morning, it'll take a pretty boring breakfast to a new level. So that's a great thing to have. And then, of course, you can experiment with whatever fruit you might have on hand, but there are a lot of uses for that. And then, of course, jerky and snacks. Like jerky is really a lot easier than probably most people would think. Basically, you just make some kind of a marinade, and then you can follow some of the recipes in here, or I include a little guide on just sort of how to create your own adventure as far as marinades go. But any jerky you make in your dehydrator is going to come out a lot better than you buy at the gas station or grocery store. So that's one of my favorite things to make. And then, of course, one of my favorite things to dehydrate are mushrooms, because they add tons of flavor to a lot of different dishes. If you like mushrooms, if you don't like mushrooms, then maybe not. But I think dried mushrooms especially, add a lot of kind of savory depth to a lot of dishes. And you can buy all kinds of dried mushrooms at the store, and they're often very expensive. It might cost you $5 or $10 for half of an ounce. So if you just do your own, saves you a lot of money, and like that ingredient on the trail is worth its weight in gold. It'll just add a ton of flavor and a ton of depth to a lot of dishes, like this mushroom and quinoa soup that I have pulled up here. Sarah, do you have a question?
Yeah, Nick, someone asked, do you ever cold hydrate when backpacking to avoid carrying a stove and fuel on a short trip? If so, what has been your experience?
I've never done an entire meal cold hydrated. Well, there is the overnight oats are a good one to do for that. So that requires no cooking, so that you just put it into a water bottle or something, like a old plastic water bottle or an Nalgene you have dedicated for rehydrating food, would work great for that. And I haven't done a ton of experimentation with it, but couscous will rehydrate very easily. So like the small, not the pearled couscous, but the really small ones. I mean, those only take about 5 minutes to cook. So you could definitely cold hydrate those over the course of a few hours, along with, other ingredients. Some dehydrated foods definitely need some heat in order to rehydrate, especially like ground meat or something like that. But you can definitely, if you want some like grains or something like that, you can definitely cold hydrate things. But yeah, couscous and overnight oats are probably two of the best things that I know of to cold hydrate.
Great. And then someone asked, what mushrooms do you recommend?
Any mushroom, anything you can get at the store, as long as you cut them into kind of small pieces. You could do any fresh mushroom that you find, especially if you're into foraging mushrooms, and you get a bunch. Dehydrating is a really good way to make those last a little bit longer. But some of my favorites are just portobello or shiitake, or just regular cremini mushrooms. They all work really well, and I found that dehydrating mushrooms really intensifies their flavor too. So even just like a normal brown mushroom, I think will taste a little bit better if it's been dehydrated. The flavor is going to be a little bit more concentrated. So a little bit goes a long way. Okay. Any other questions at the moment, or? Okay, I'll keep going. Another thing I like to dehydrate a lot of is you can dehydrate tomato sauce and like tomato paste very easily. Tomato is technically a fruit, so you're basically just making a fruit roll up out of tomatoes, and it reconstitutes really well in water. So it's great for making soups. It's great for making stews, sauces, and the tomato leather itself is very easy to make. So, you know, great pasta sauce idea right there. And you can always add whatever other vegetables or whatever you want to that in order to make it your own. But that's another one of my favorite things. So a couple of things that I kind of rely on to make backpacking meals is just some of the things that I just kind of always have on hand, and a few things I bring a little bit extra of sometimes on the trail. So bouillon cubes are great for backpacking. They're tiny, lightweight, have a ton of flavor, and will, you know, reconstitute in just a few minutes. So I use a lot of those in a lot of the soups and stews, and they're even nice to have car camping and at home sometimes too. Milk powders are another one. So, you know, if you're making any kind of soup or any dish that you want like some creaminess to, just bringing milk powder and reconstituting it in camp is a great way to add some dairy to your meal. And also for non-dairy options, coconut milk powder is surprisingly easy to find. Most grocery stores will have some kind of non-dairy milk powder option. Coconut milk is my favorite one. Great in like curries or any kind of soup with like a Asian flavor profile that you're looking for. Coconut milk powder works great. Packaged cans or packaged and canned meats and fish are always great to have, like the tuna packets or packets of chicken or salmon, you know, depending on what you can find. But those are really good to have just to add a good bunch of protein to your meal, especially when you're backpacking and you're tired and you need something kind of hefty. And then, of course, just small containers. Like I have a bunch of little small containers, you know, for some of my favorite spices, oils, vinegars, salt and pepper, essential, kind of those things. And then condiments. I almost never go anywhere without, you know, backpacking or camping. I always have like a small bottle of some kind of hot sauce or something. And, you know, if you want to put ketchup on your eggs or whatever, you know, go ahead and do that. Take whatever condiments you want, but like don't overlook them. And most condiments are pretty shelf stable, so great to have backpacking. And then, you know, cooking oils, vinegars, sometimes a little splash of apple cider vinegar or something like that can, or rice vinegar can really take the dish to a new level. Then it's like always good to have lots of, you know, instant rice and noodles, like egg noodles, any kind of small pasta shaped noodle that cooks quickly. Great to have backpacking, just, you know, add some carbs to your meal very easily and very quickly. These are just kind of things that I like to have on hand for when I'm planning a meal, so that way, yeah, just can add lots of good nutrition to your meal. And I also like to add fresh ingredients as much as I can into backpacking meals. So sometimes Like I was saying, just because you can dehydrate just about anything doesn't mean you should. Some things take almost as long to rehydrate as if you were to just cook them fresh. So, if you take like a small potato and you cut it up real small, it's going to take 10 minutes or less to be tender and to cook through if you cut it small enough. And it would probably take longer than that for it to rehydrate if you were cooking it from dry. So some things like that. And then it also is just like a nice way to make a meal taste like it didn't come out of a bag, to add something fresh. It gives it a little bit of more of like a home cooked taste and more of a home cooked feel to it. If you can incorporate some kind of fresh ingredient, or some kind of fresh herb. It might depend on where you're going. If you're backpacking in hot climates, it is a lot harder to do that. But in cold climates, you can get away with taking a lot more fresh ingredients. So if you're new to something, if you're new to a technique or an ingredient, I highly recommend trying to cook it at home first. Maybe not the exact recipe, but just be familiar with how that ingredient works or what that technique is. Like, for example, there's a roux in this book. There's some recipes that require a roux. If you've never made a roux before, it's not that hard, but you probably don't want to do it when you're camping the first time you ever try doing it. Would highly recommend, knowing like a few techniques, trying them at home, experimenting before you go into the backcountry. And, the same goes for like, you want to cook things that you want to start out cooking things that you're familiar with. So if you've never made a curry before, you might want to try that at home first and then take it into the backcountry. But get an idea of, how certain dishes turn out and what you like and what your preferences are. And, if you're unfamiliar with something, maybe try it at home first. And also don't overthink it. Try and keep it simple when you're in the backcountry, because, if you plan a really elaborate meal, it might not go so well if you're super tired after hiking a whole bunch of miles and everyone else who you're camping with is hungry and wants you to cook faster. It's not going to be the best experience. So try and keep it simple and, as much as you can. And obviously prepping a lot ahead of time will help you out there, but don't try and do something that you've never done before in the backcountry. Yeah.
We have a question about bringing spices, oils, and condiments while backpacking. Is there any type of container you recommend for that?
Yeah, so I have these little, I think Coleman makes them. They're like two-sided containers. Like they're pretty small, and you can bring 4 or 5 different spices or so in them, and just anything that is any small container. And there are a lot of backpacking specific containers for that sort of thing, and the ones that I have are, I think they're, like I said, I think they're Coleman makes them, and they make all different sizes of little bottles and things like that you can put stuff in, and that's what I use for the most part. And then, yeah, I definitely don't want to bring like a whole huge bottle of like hot sauce or something in the backcountry. But yeah, there's some really good, inexpensive options for small backpacking containers that I use. And of course, like, experiment. Like I said, like, these recipes are just sort of a basic guide, and you can use your own judgment, and change things how you see fit. And like, if you, if there's something that you're wondering about, if you can dehydrate it, or something like that, and you can't find good information on it, just try it, see what happens. Start small. So like, don't waste like a whole batch of something when you're trying it, but try it out. That's part of the process is learning, and sometimes you fail, and sometimes you stumble across something really exciting. But yeah, and in the end, when you're camping and you're backpacking, anything that you make in the backcountry is going to taste a lot better anyway. So stakes are a little bit lower. But yeah, I definitely would encourage you to experiment as much as you can and report back, of course. So another big part of this book is our car camping recipes. I love car camping because you can bring almost anything. I mean, there are some restrictions, but for the most part, anything goes. So you can bring all your cast iron, you can bring your 2-burner stove, you can bring all the utensils, and space. You might have some space restrictions or time restrictions, but for the most part, if you have a 2-burner stove and a cast iron pan, that's like 90% of how I cook at home anyway. So being able to bring that out to a campsite somewhere, whether you're dispersed camping or at an established campsite, is really exciting to me. It's fun to cook outside, and your options are really a lot more. You can really take things to another level that you wouldn't be able to when you're backpacking. Especially because nowadays, with coolers have gotten so good, it's just as good as your refrigerator. My 2-burner stove, I swear, is better than my stovetop at home. It is just like if you have a gas range at home, you'd understand, but I don't. But so I love having the propane burners. I think it is a really nice way to cook. And then, if you're cooking over a campfire, a little bit of smokiness just makes everything taste a lot better. So that's another fun aspect of it. So these are a few things that I always have when I go car camping. So heat resistant gloves, so like some big leather gloves, will really help you handle hot cast iron pans, or move around some logs in the fire in order to create some space for cooking or whatever you need. Those are pretty essential. Tongs also to move things around, and like the big girl tongs, even if you don't have gloves, you can kind of move some logs and coals around and stuff. 2-burner propane stove, gold Coleman standby. I'm sure everyone has, if you've been camping before, you've probably eaten a meal off of one of those. I love to have a rectangular grill grate. So like I have one that's kind of more, that's fairly long, that allows you to sort of prop it on some rocks on the side of a fire pit if you need to, if you don't have a grill grate at your campsite. A little grill grate, you can put a cast iron pan on top of it, or you can cook steak or kebabs or what have you on top of it. That's really good to have. Cast iron obviously is indestructible, and just a wonderful material to cook with, especially camping. You really can't ever ruin it, and so it is very well suited to camping. You know, you can put a cast iron pot fire and it's going to do just fine. If you're using a Dutch oven, or you're using like a grill grate or like a grill at like a public campsite, I always use a charcoal chimney starter to start coals if I don't have a fire. That is by far the best method to start charcoal. If you start using a charcoal chimney starter and you never have before, you'll never go back to lighter fluid. It works way better. It's very easy to use. It's foolproof, and your food doesn't taste like lighter fluid ever. Multiple coolers if you can. So one of the things, if you're out for a couple of days or so, having one cooler for drinks and one cooler for your food is going to help keep your food a lot colder, because if usually the drink cooler is going to be opened a lot more often than the food cooler. So every time you open it, you're reducing the amount of time that cooler is going to be able to keep your food cold and safe. So if you can, it's great to have separate coolers for that. And then of course, ways to put out fire are important if you're using a campfire. Shovel is great to have for turning the coals, after you doused water on them, and then making sure you have enough water to douse a campfire is important. So if you're car camping in a place where you don't have access to fresh water, make sure you bring enough. And then a meat thermometer. Always have one of those in the camping box, because if you're ever cooking like a steak or something, the only way you're really going to know how that steak is doing is if you have a meat thermometer. But it's a foolproof way to make sure your food is cooked correctly. So campfire coals, great way to if you might have a campfire with a grate like already built into it, or you might have your own. Some of the things you want to make sure about is making sure you have enough time for the coals to burn down, for them to be hot. You also want to make sure you have room in the fire pit for whatever you're cooking, whether it's a foil packet or a Dutch oven or something like that. And also make sure you have enough wood. Always have more wood than you think you need. So this is one of the campfires that I would use for cooking, where like you have a little bit of space, you can see in the bottom, enough room for whatever you have cooking there. And of course, a couple ideas. You could throw some foil packets, or there's the grill grate there. It's a great way to cook things. Or sometimes you have a grill grate at your campsite. Dutch oven cooking. This is a whole new world of cooking, because it allows you to basically bake, braise, and roast anything anywhere. So it has so it's cast iron, and it has a lid that has a lip on it that allows you to put coals on top of the lid, so you get top down cooking, which is essential if you're trying to brown the top of something, or baking a bread or something like that. And then it has some little legs underneath to raise above the coals. So you can put campfire coals on top of it, or you can just use charcoal if you want to. It's also great for crowds. So if you're cooking for a lot of people, you can get a big Dutch oven, make a big stew, and have one pot to feed however many people you need. And it takes a lot of trial and error, but it's really not that hard to do. It's really easy to make great meals with Dutch oven. So there are a lot of rules they say about Dutch ovens, about how many coals you need to put on top and whatever, but I always just start with more coals than I think I need, because it's a lot easier to take coals away than it is to add them, especially if you're using charcoal. So I always start with more and then just kind of use your senses as far as like how many, coals you need on top or beneath the Dutch oven. But I always find it's easier to start off hotter than it is to heat it up. It's a lot easier to cool it off than it is to heat it up again. And also make sure it's preheated. And then rotate it, and if it's in the fire, and also use a Dutch oven stand or do it in the fire pit, so that way you don't end up with like a big mess of coals somewhere in your campsite. But yeah, you can bake breads, stews, braises, desserts. Enchiladas turn out great in the Dutch oven. Yeah. But anyway, so here are a couple of closing ideas. Being prepared is probably one of the best things you can do. I mean, it's just gonna save you a lot of headaches, in camp if you chop as many things as you can ahead of time. Portion things ahead of time, so that way you're not trying to do everything in camp. It's going to just save you a lot of stress. Make sure you have everything you need, like double check, triple check before you leave. There are checklists in the book, as far as things to bring, and always good to have extra cleaning supplies, paper towels, trash bags, stuff like that. Always check your fire restrictions. You don't want to plan on cooking over a campfire and then realize that campfires are banned, which is the reality for most of us in the West for most of the summer. And always bring extra fuel, wood, and charcoal, because nothing is worse than being halfway through cooking and realizing that you don't have enough wood or fuel to finish cooking. And of course, store your food properly, especially bear country, and then try and keep some things on hand while you are, just in your, I have like a dedicated camping box that I just always have a couple of things like paper towels and utensils and paper plates, extra lighters, matches, whatnot. But so, there are some checklists in the book, and then some things that I just always keep kind of stocked in that box. And bring snacks, because sometimes camp cooking is going to take a lot longer than you think it will. When you're dealing with all kinds of weather conditions and a lot of uncertainty, sometimes you and everyone else you're with gets hungry. So that's one of the things in this book, is there are a lot of recipes that you can make ahead, especially for car camping. So, make sure you bring plenty of snacks, just in case it takes longer than you think it will in order to cook. And then, of course, leave no trace. These are the leave no trace principles, and talk more about them in the book. There's a way that you can apply your camp cooking to each one of these principles. But what it comes down to is just pack it in, pack it out, and just be considerate of the environment that you're traveling through. And that's what I have for the presentation. Sarah,
we do have one question about snacks. Do you have any recipes in the book for energy bars?
I do, yes. Well, more like breakfast sort of bars, but kind of like granola bars. There are a few in there that are, I guess I would say, granola based, but yeah, I do have make ahead bars that you could use for energy, lunch, breakfast, what have you in there.
All right. Well, thank you so much for sharing your expertise and all of those great tips with us, Nick. Um, Everyone, please feel free to put any questions that you have in the chat. And I'd like to show you, this is a copy of Nick's new book, Wild Eats, published by Colorado Mountain Club Press. Okay, let's see. We have a question. Freeze drying versus dehydrating.
Okay.
What is the difference?
Well, first of all, I don't think there's any way to freeze dry ingredients at home unless you have a very large commercial kitchen. But so dehydrating when you're at home is pretty much the way to do it. So dehydrating is basically, so you're preserving the food by removing moisture. I'm not an expert on freeze drying, so I can't tell you exactly how it's different, but I can tell you about why dehydrating works, is because, well, you're taking like a cooked ingredient. So like if you're say making, if you're dehydrating ground beef, you're going to cook it first. So you're cooking out the pathogens and cooking out any bacteria in it. And then you're going to remove any moisture from that. And as far as I know, I don't think there's a way to freeze dry anything at home. That's kind of meant for more industrial operations.
Tell us a little bit more about, you recommended a vacuum sealer in addition to the dehydrator. What does a vacuum sealer cost and how does that work? How do they work?
So vacuum sealer, you can get one for probably around $75, and then you get bags for it. Like you can get a roll of like uncut bags where you sort of like seal them off yourselves, or you can get individual bags that you seal up. Yeah, so basically what it does is the vacuum sealer will suck all of the oxygen out of the bag and then seal it with heat. And what that does, so, you know, one of your enemies when you're trying to preserve food is oxygen. That bacteria needs oxygen in order to survive. And so when you deprive it of the oxygen, then your food's going to last a lot longer. Especially, you know, you can only do so much on your own, like with like a Ziploc bag. You can press it down or whatever, but you're not going to get all the oxygen out of there. The vacuum sealer will just suck all of that oxygen out, and it's going to keep your food fresher for a lot longer. Especially like works really well for jerky, and it's really nice to have for backpacking meals too, because it, you know, it'll suck the oxygen out and make your package just like, it'll just, you know, whatever you put into that bag is just going to be very small and very packable.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So for someone just getting started with trying to make their own backpacking meals, what is a good recipe that you would recommend starting with?
From the book?
Yeah.
Let's see. I would recommend starting, well, if you're using a dehydrator, I think there are a lot of things. So a lot of the backpacking recipes are fairly straightforward. But I would recommend got it here. I would recommend the black bean soup because let's see here. First of all, you can use canned black beans, which dehydrate really well. And you can pack pretty much everything into the vacuum seal bag. And then you pretty much only need to bring, you have a few fresh ingredients, but they're pretty straightforward. So I would say this is black bean soup. The beans are very easy to dehydrate, especially you buy them canned. Canned beans are pretty much just as good as what you would make at home, if you're from dried beans. So they're a great ingredient to work with, very easy. And also the black bean soup incorporates some, a fresh sweet potato. So easy to find ingredients, and also pretty expensive ingredients too. So
someone wrote in, time to move up from ramen. I couldn't agree more. I'm feeling pretty inspired to try some of these next summer. Okay, we have a question about saving water when doing dishes. Do you have any tips for that?
Yeah, so usually what I do when I'm backpacking is I will kind of wipe out the pot that I used to cook with, and then I'll just boil water in that pot. And then when you're boiling water in that pot, first of all, it's going to loosen anything that's stuck on into the pot. And then use that hot boiling water to pour into your other cups, into your other dishes. You need to put a little drop of soap in there too, and just kind of, scrub it around. But like using just like that one pot of boiling water to first of all, clean that pot and then clean your other dishes. You can make a little bit of water go a long way. And you could even use water that you didn't even filter for that, because you're boiling it, so you're gonna kill off any bacteria or anything that would get you sick. But that's typically what I do, is start with that.
Great. Well, one last question for me. In the book, you have the recipe to make the perfect s'mores.
Yes.
Can you tell us just a little bit about how to make the perfect s'mores?
Don't burn the marshmallow. So marshmallow is pretty much entirely sugar. And so if you just are very careful about how you roast it, you can turn that in, you can caramelize it really nicely. And in the book, I mentioned a little bit about like the process of what's happening. So sugar starts out as a single molecule, and when it heats up, it starts breaking down into many other different compounds, giving it sweet and savory and bitter and smoky flavors. And there's definitely a sweet spot in between raw and burnt where you're going to get the best flavor. And in order to do that, you need to first of all make sure you're not sticking it straight into the flame, because that's just going to light it right on fire, and any of those flavored compounds between raw and burnt are just going to be lost immediately. So you want to find like the glowing embers of the fire, and kind of take that corner of that fire and use that spot in order to slowly get your marshmallow up to the right amount of browning and caramelization. But lighting on fire and swinging it around don't do that.
Excellent. As a follow-up question, what is the best kind of chocolate to use?
Oof. I'm a fan of dark chocolate, so I would say dark chocolate. I would say whatever you have. You could use a Reese's peanut butter cup, or whatever kind of candy bar you can find. Milk chocolate is classic, but I would say whatever chocolate you have is the best chocolate when you're camping.
Excellent. If there's any last questions for Nick, please go ahead and put them in the chat. And now I'm going to do the drawing for the free gift membership. Thank you to everyone who bought the book during the event. We hope you enjoy it. And our winner tonight for the free gift membership is Anna Lau. I may be saying your last name wrong, so I'm going to put in the chat Anna Lau, and I will mail you the free gift membership tomorrow. All right. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending tonight. This has been really fun and inspiring. Thank you, Nick, for sharing all of your expertise with us. If there's any last questions, go ahead and throw them in the chat. Everyone's saying thank you, Nick. And we'll see you out on the trail.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.